You've probably been there. That moment when uh, maybe someone you're talking to just glances away quickly,
Uh,
or maybe a colleague sends a really brief email, or
yeah.
your partner is just, well, quiet.
Yeah, that silence can be loud.
Right. And instantly your brain just fires up. Like before you even have a second to really think, you know, you know what they're thinking.
That instant certainty.
Yeah. They think I'm incompetent or they're definitely annoyed with me. Maybe they think this is a stupid idea.
You're totally convinced.
Totally. So convinced you, like, stop listening properly. You don't ask questions. You just react. React to the thought you've kind of put in their head.
And that reaction, it usually feels pretty awful, doesn't
Oh,
it?
absolutely.
Terrible. It really does. And that powerful feeling, that certainty about what's going on inside someone else, their thoughts, feelings, motives, when actually you have zero solid proof. That's it.
Yeah.
That's the core of what we're diving into today. Welcome to our deep dive into this, well, really widespread and often problematic thinking pattern. It's called mind reading.
Right, mind reading. And we've got a really great collection of sources here. We're drawing from, therapeutic resources, places like the Center for Clinical Interventions, Groundwork Counseling.
Good stuff there.
Yeah, and articles from Psychology Today, Your Tango. Then there are clinical explanations from like the Bay Area, CBT Center, and Therapist Aid.
And even some real-world perspectives, right?
Yeah.
From places like Reddit.
Exactly, people sharing their experiences. So our mission really is to use all this material to, well, unpack mind reading.
Get right into it.
Yeah. What is it? Why do our brains do it so quickly? What's the impact and it's significant on us, on our relationships? And maybe most importantly, arm you with some, practical evidence-based ways to spot it and crucially shift out of it.
And, this isn't about trying to diagnose anyone or get bogged down in clinical jargon.
Oh, no, definitely not.
It's more about understanding a very common, very human kind of mental shortcut that, well, most of us take sometimes, often without even realizing.
Right, it's automatic.
Yeah. And these sources, they really help us see that our thoughts, especially those assumptions we make about others, they aren't necessarily, well, reality. They're not always accurate.
Absolutely. Think of this deep dive as like getting a kind of X-ray vision, but not into other people's minds.
No, that's the trick.
Right. It's X-ray vision into your own thought processes. By understanding mind reading, you can start to navigate your interactions, your own internal world with, well, just much more clarity. And that's incredibly empowering, isn't it?
It really is.
It's about moving from just guessing what's happening out there to actually understanding what's going on in here.
It's a brilliant way to put it. And we'll definitely circle back to that idea. So, okay, let's start with the definition. What is mind reading really?
Lay it out for us.
At its most basic level, it's assuming you know what someone else is thinking or feeling. Simple, right?
Mm-hmm.
But the key bit is without any solid proof.
No evidence, just a hunch.
Exactly. It's guesswork. But what makes it a distortion, a cognitive distortion, as several sources like psychotherapy resources and the Bay Area CBT Center point out, is that you become so convinced of this assumption.
You believe it utterly.
Yeah, you believe it so much that you often don't even bother to check it out. You just treat your assumption like it's a fact, like case closed.
You just lock onto that one interpretation, don't you? And kind of close the door to anything else. It's like you think you've downloaded their thoughts, but actually you've just projected your own thoughts onto them.
Exactly. You've nailed it. And critically, this comes up again and again in the sources. This assumption is almost always negative.
Ah, right. Not usually, oh, they must think I'm amazing.
Rarely. No, psychotherapy resources, groundwork counseling, the Center for Clinical Interventions, they all note it typically involves believing others are looking down on you, seeing you critically, viewing you negatively somehow.
Okay.
And often, this negative view you assume they have. It kind of mirrors the negative way you might see yourself.
Ooh. So my mind reading is usually telling me they're judging you, not they're secretly admiring your shoes.
Pretty much. That negative bias, it's a real hallmark. Now, where does this fit, in the bigger picture of how our brains can sometimes trip us up?
Yeah, is it just a weird quirk or?
Well, places like Therapist Aid, Center for Clinical Interventions, they categorize mind reading as a type of cognitive distortion, or sometimes called an unhelpful thinking style.
Okay, cognitive distortion.
Yeah, these are basically like systematic errors or biases in how we process information. Our brains are always trying to make sense of the world fast. Right?
Efficiency.
Right. Efficiency.
Yeah.
And sometimes these mental shortcuts, well, they lead us down the wrong path, an inaccurate path.
Like a little bug in our mental software. Is that a fair way to think about it?
You could definitely think of it that way, that these automatic patterns, often happening just below our conscious awareness, maybe triggered by stress or strong feelings.
So it's not like we're choosing to do it.
No, not at all. The Center for Clinical Interventions really emphasizes that.
Yeah.
It's an automatic habit, like a reflex. You're not deliberately deciding to misinterpret someone. Your brain just does it fast, automatically.
But the problem comes when it happens a lot.
Exactly. When this habit is used consistently over and over, it becomes a major source of emotional distress, anxiety, sadness, frustration, all that stuff.
And you mentioned it's a specific type of jumping to conclusions.
Yes, good point. The Center for Clinical Intervention source explains this well. Jumping to conclusions usually takes two main forms.
Right.
One is predictive thinking. That's where you forecast a negative future outcome without any real evidence, like assuming you're going to fail a test before you even sit down to take it.
Right, predicting doom.
Pretty much. The other form is mind reading. And that's where you assume you know what's going on inside someone else's head, their thoughts, their feelings, their motives, again, without evidence.
Okay, so predictive thinking is guessing the future, the outcome of something.
Yeah.
And mind reading is guessing the internal state, the thoughts and feelings of the people involved.
It's a really clear way to distinguish them.
Both are guesses we treat as facts, just aimed at different things.
Perfectly put. Predictive thinking is about the event. Mind reading is about the people. And because, well, we're constantly interacting with people.
All day long.
All day long. Mind reading is a distortion that can pop up dozens, maybe even hundreds of times a day, often in really subtle ways we don't even notice.
Which is exactly why it's so crucial to be able to spot it when it happens. And the sources, they give such great, really relatable examples of how this actually shows up in day-to-day life.
They really do.
Yeah.
Let's dive into some of those. They bring the whole concept to life.
Please, let's hear them.
Okay, so imagine this. You're giving a presentation, feels like it's going pretty well, you're in the flow,
Uh-huh.
and then you see someone, front row, they kind of nod off for a second.
No.
Right. The mind-reading thought just springs up instantly. Ugh, I am so boring. I'm literally putting people to sleep right now.
And you just grab onto that one little action in the nod and bam, it confirms your deepest fear about yourself, that you're boring.
Exactly. But as Psychotherapy Resources points out, that person, maybe they were up all night studying, or they're jet lagged, or maybe they have a medical thing going on.
Could be anything.
Anything. Their nodding off might have absolutely nothing to do with you or your presentation.
But your brain doesn't offer those options first.
No. You've taken their behavior, filtered it straight through your own insecurity maybe about being boring, and created this definitive negative conclusion about their inner state. They're bored because of you.
Wow. Okay. What's another one?
Okay, another classic. You pass a friend on the street, you wave, maybe say hi,
Yeah.
but they just walk right past, don't acknowledge you.
Ouch. That stings.
It does, and the mind reading software just kicks right in. He saw me. He totally ignored me. Deliberately, he must not like me anymore.
That feels so real in the moment. The rejection.
Totally. But, groundwork counseling and psychotherapy resources remind us the simple reality. Maybe they were just preoccupied, stressed out, lost in thought, or maybe they just physically didn't see you, looked the other way for a second.
So many possibilities.
Right. But your feeling of being disliked suddenly becomes a hard fact based purely on this ambiguous interaction.
Okay, I get that one.
Or how about this one? Super common in relationships. Your spouse, your partner, comes home. They're unusually quiet, unresponsive maybe.
Yeah.
The mind reading thought immediately, oh no, they're angry with me. What did I do wrong this time?
That automatic jump straight to self-blame, assuming their mood is all about you.
Exactly. But the sources, like psychotherapy resources, they offer other explanations, right? Maybe they just had a horrible day at work, got criticized by their boss, or got some upsetting news. Maybe they're just too drained or upset to even talk about it yet. And it has absolutely nothing to do with you or anything you did or didn't do.
That happens all the time, doesn't it? We take their mood personally. Make it about us.
We really do. We internalize it.
Yeah.
And similarly, maybe you're on a date. The person is quieter than you expected.
Right.
The instant mind reading thought, they definitely don't like me. This is going terribly. And groundwork counseling notes, even if they actually say, no, I'm having a fine time, the mind reader might just dismiss that, convinced The quietness is the real signal.
Ignoring the words, trusting the interpretation of the silence.
Right. And maybe they're not sharing that they just got a call about a family emergency right before the date, or they're dealing with some big personal crisis.
You just don't know. Or in the workplace, getting passed over for a promotion.
Yes. You don't get the promotion. The mind-reading thought immediately jumps in. My boss must think I'm completely incompetent, a total loser.
The harshest interpretation.
Always. When, as groundwork counseling suggests, maybe the boss thinks you're actually great. But perhaps you just needed, say, one specific certification for that role, or a few more years' experience in a particular area.
Something specific, not a global judgment.
Exactly. But it's so easy to default to that global judgment about your own worth based on one outcome, especially when you're convinced you know the negative reason lurking in your boss's mind.
What about just general social anxiety triggers, like walking into a crowded room alone?
Oh yeah, the Bay Area CBT Center brings that up. Walking into, say, a cafeteria alone, and being instantly convinced that every single person is looking at you, noticing you're alone, and judging you for it.
That feeling of all eyes on you.
Totally.
Yeah.
Or arriving late to a meeting and being absolutely certain that every person around the table is mentally criticizing you for being tardy. These aren't even about specific one-on-one interactions, right? They're these broad, negative assumptions about the collective thoughts of a whole group.
It really shows how much self-consciousness fuels this whole thing.
It really does. And then there's that really painful relationship example from your Tango and Be Well therapy group, that unspoken expectation. If they really loved me, they would just know. They'd know what I need.
Yes. My partner should be a mind reader expectation.
Exactly. This is mind reading aimed squarely at the people closest to us. Assuming your partner should just, intuitively understand your unspoken needs, your desires, your feelings.
Which is impossible.
It's impossible. So when they inevitably fail to read your mind because they can't, you interpret their lack of response or their lack of understanding as proof. Proof they don't love you enough or don't care enough. And that just sets up this awful cycle of resentment and disappointment. Because you're reacting to your assumption about their thoughts, that they don't care enough to figure you out, instead of actually communicating what you need.
Wow. Okay. When you lay out all those examples side by side like that, you really see the pattern.
Yeah.
An ambiguous situation happens. Then instantly there's a negative interpretation about what someone else is thinking or feeling, usually filtered through our own insecurities. We treat it as a certainty, and we almost never check it out.
That's a perfect summary. And the impact of this habit, it's far from trivial. This isn't just some, interesting little quirk of how we think. It profoundly affects our internal state, how we feel, and our external interactions, how we behave.
Okay, let's unpack that impact then. The sources are really clear that our thoughts have this direct, powerful link to how we feel and what we do.
They absolutely do. This is like foundational stuff in cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT. You see it in Therapist Aid, the Center for Clinical Interventions, Bay Area CBT Center.
Yeah.
They all highlight it.
What's the core idea?
The core idea is that your emotional reaction, and your behavioral response too, isn't caused directly by the situation itself. It's caused by your interpretation of it, your thoughts about the situation. Right. So if you're constantly using mind reading to generate negative interpretations, well, you're going to generate negative emotions. Simple as that.
So going back to the quiet partner example, their quietness doesn't make me feel hurt or anxious.
Yeah.
It's my thought, they're angry with me, I must have done something wrong. That's what creates those feelings.
Exactly. The quietness is just quietness, an
Yeah.
event. Your thought gives it the emotional meaning, the charge. And consistently believing these negative, unchecked interpretations from mind reading, as groundwork counseling in the Bay Area CBT Center emphasize, that's a major fuel source for anxiety, for stress, for self-doubt. It can significantly contribute to depression too.
It sounds exhausting.
It is. And social anxiety in particular just thrives on this stuff.
Yeah.
This constant self-conscious focus on perceived negative judgment from others. If you look at Reddit discussions from people dealing with social anxiety, they're often filled with examples of interpreting every little glance, every silence, as proof someone dislikes them or is criticizing them.
Yeah, if you're constantly walking around assuming people are thinking badly of you, that sounds isolating and just draining.
Totally isolating. And it reinforces a negative self-perception. You become hyper-focused on trying to detect and avoid these imagined negative judgments. And that shapes how you see yourself and how you interact with the whole world.
And then those negative feelings, the anxiety or hurt triggered by the mind reading, they drive unhelpful behaviors here.
Right, absolutely.
Hmm.
Psychotherapy resources and groundwork counseling detail this. Our imagined negative reactions from others often trigger withdrawal. We might pull away, physically or emotionally.
Shut down.
Yeah, shut down. Or we might become defensive. Or even, sometimes, preemptively counterattack based on an imagined slight.
Like, get your defense in first.
Kind of. If you think your colleague hates your idea, you might present it really defensively, even if they actually had no negative thoughts about it to begin with.
You create tension.
You do. And the Bay Area CBT Center points out, in relationships, this can look like avoidance, holding back affection or information, or maybe overcompensating, trying too hard based on your assumptions about what your partner is thinking or needing.
And here's the bit that always gets me, the self-fulfilling prophecy part. It sounds so insidious.
It is. It's one of the most damaging impacts, and it's mentioned across multiple sources, psychotherapy resources, groundwork counseling, Bay Area CBT Center. By responding to your imagined negative reaction from someone, maybe with withdrawal or defensiveness or avoidance, you can actually create the very negative interaction or dynamic you were afraid of in the first place.
So you behave as if their negative thought is true, and then your behavior actually provokes a real negative response from them.
Precisely. You assumed your friend was annoyed because their text seemed brief, right? So maybe you stopped texting them back for a while. Give them the cold shoulder.
Okay.
They then feel hurt or confused by your sudden silence. And now they actually are annoyed or distant. But it's because of your reaction to a thought you put in their head, not because of their initial, possibly neutral, brief text.
Wow. Your assumption literally created the reality you feared.
That's the loop. It's powerful. Really damaging. It means our unchecked thoughts, our mind reading, can actively harm our relationships.
Yeah.
Your Tango and the Bay Area CBT Center are really clear on this. Mind reading is a major source of misunderstandings, disappointment, resentment, stress, disconnection in relationships. When you expect your partner to just know what you need without telling them, you prevent the open, honest communication that relationships absolutely need to thrive.
You're basically setting them up to fail.
You are setting them up to fail at telepathy, which isn't fair, and then you react negatively to their inevitable failure.
Okay, so the impact is huge. It fuels negative emotions, shapes how we see ourselves, drives unhelpful actions, creates these self-fulfilling prophecies, damages relationships. Given all that, why? Why do we do this? Why is our brain so prone to this particular error?
That is the million-dollar question, isn't it? And the sources suggest a few key reasons. First, as we touched on, it's just automatic.
Speed thing.
Yeah. Therapist aid and the Center for Clinical Interventions remind us it happens incredibly fast, often like a flash, making it really hard to catch in the moment before we start reacting to it. Our brains are just wired for speed, for efficiency, and this is a fast way, though often inaccurate, to try and process social information.
An efficiency shortcut that sacrifices accuracy. Got it.
Right. And maybe the deepest reason this comes up a lot is that our mind reading is often really a projection of our own internal world.
What do you mean by projection?
Well, the Center for Clinical Interventions, those Reddit discussions, the Bay Area CBT Center, they frequently point out that the negative judgments we assume others are making about us, they're often the very same negative judgments we hold about ourselves.
Okay. I see.
We assume others think poorly of us because deep down, we think poorly of ourselves.
That really resonates. It's like our own insecurity is putting on a mask and pretending to be someone else's opinion of us.
That's a brilliant analogy.
Yeah.
Your own self-doubt writes the script for the characters you invent inside other people's minds.
Wow.
And this ties in tightly with underlying social anxiety and self-consciousness. Psychology Today discusses this, and you see it in the Reddit comments too. If you're highly concerned about how you're perceived by others.
Your radar is always on.
Exactly. Your attention is constantly scanning externally, looking for potential signs of judgment. And that just creates fertile ground for these mind-reading assumptions to sprout and take root.
So the more self-conscious I am, the more likely I am to be trying to read minds. And probably negatively.
It seems that way. That heightened self-focus, ironically, makes you less aware of what's actually happening around you, and more focused on seeing your internal fear reflected back at you. Psychology Today also offers a slightly different, interesting angle. Sometimes we might engage in mind reading because we're actually trying to manage or control the thoughts, feelings, or reactions of others.
How so?
We focus really intensely on predicting what they might be thinking so we can adjust our behavior, maybe to please them or avoid conflict. We're acting based on our guess about them, rather than acting based on our own values or what we genuinely think or feel.
Yeah, okay, so it's like a form of people-pleasing, but driven by assumed knowledge of their mind.
Yes, exactly. You're trying to sort of orchestrate the interaction based on your best guess of their internal state. And then, somewhat paradoxically, psychology today and your tango suggest we might try to read others' minds because we're not sufficiently aware of our own minds.
Wait, say that again. We read others because we don't know ourselves.
Yeah, it's counterintuitive, isn't it? But if you're kind of disconnected from your own thoughts, your own feelings, needs, values, you might default to trying to figure everyone else out as a way to orient yourself, a way to navigate the world when your internal compass isn't clear.
That's a really profound point. I'm so busy trying to figure out them, I'm actually missing out on figuring out me.
Which brings us really neatly to a concept that the Psychology Today source introduces. It's this idea of shifting from being a mind reader to becoming a mind knower.
Okay, mind reader versus mind knower. Tell me more. What does a mind knower look like? How are they different?
Well, the Psychology Today article contrasts them really clearly. The mind reader, as we've been describing, right, they're externally focused, preoccupied with pleasing others, or at least not displeasing them. They rely heavily on their imagination, their assumptions, rather than actual facts.
Okay.
They often lack clearly defined personal values that guide their actions. And, crucially, they tend to trust others' perceived reactions more than their own thinking or judgment.
So their compass is constantly pointed outwards, trying to navigate based on these guessed signals from everyone else.
Precisely. The mind knower, on the other hand, they are rooted firmly in their own internal world.
Okay.
They don't waste energy trying to control or predict what others are thinking. They focus on facts, on verifiable information. They have clearly defined personal values and principles, and they let their own best thinking guide their actions.
Not the assumed thoughts of others.
Exactly. They're self-motivated. They act based on who they want to be, what they value, rather than constantly seeking external approval or avoiding disapproval. And here's a key benefit. By allowing other people to be in charge of their own minds,
Yeah.
the mind knower can actually enjoy relationships more authentically. There's less guesswork, less resentment.
That sounds like a fundamentally different way to exist in the world. Much more grounded, stable.
It really is.
Can you give us some tangible examples, like from the sources? What does the shift look like in practice, day-to-day stuff?
Yes, definitely. The Psychology Today source has some great comparisons. Okay, so instead of talking only about subjects you think your friend finds interesting,
Which is the mind reader guessing their preference and tailoring the conversation.
right, the mind knower shares what's genuinely important or interesting to them, and they create space for their friend to do the same. It becomes an exchange based on authentic self-expression from both sides, not just assumed compatibility or trying to please.
So it's about showing up as yourself fully and trusting that real connection can happen through that authenticity, rather than trying to guess the right way to be.
Exactly. Or let's take a workplace scenario. Instead of assuming your boss is upset because a project is maybe slightly behind schedule.
And then sending a preemptive, super apologetic email, that's the mind reader reacting to an imagined negative judgment.
Precisely. The mind knower, instead, focuses on defining how they will manage project updates. Based on their professional standards, their commitment to communication, they create a plan for updating the boss, and then they follow through on their plan. Their focus is on their own responsibility and communication strategy, not trying to manage the boss's potential mood.
Acting from a place of personal responsibility and values, rather than reacting to a feared external judgment. I like that.
Right. Another example. A mind reader might stop talking about, say, politics around their parents because they think it makes their parents anxious or upset.
Avoiding the topic based on an assumption.
Yeah. A mind knower, however, would clearly define their own beliefs and principles about politics. And they'd share them when it felt relevant or important to them, maybe based on their value for open dialogue or expressing their views authentically, while, of course, still respecting their parents' right to their own feelings and views.
It's about owning your own perspective and expressing it, rather than suppressing it based on an unchecked assumption about how someone else might react.
Yes. Or in a group setting. A mind reader might stay silent on a subject because they assume everyone else knows more. They assume their contribution would sound ignorant or stupid.
Fear of judgment again.
Right. The mind knower, though, they share their thinking, their perspective, but they remain open to questions, open to learning new information. Their focus isn't on being perceived as the expert or worrying about looking foolish. It's on contributing what they know and engaging in the discussion.
Contributing from your own knowledge base, but staying humble and open instead of just shutting down because you assume you compare poorly.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And one more, back to a domestic example. A mind reader might worry intensely that their partner is annoyed because they forgot to do a specific chore. They dwell on the assumed annoyance. A mind knower, instead of getting stuck on the partner's assumed feeling, focuses on how they want to manage their household responsibilities, maybe based on their value for contributing fairly to the shared home, and then they follow through on completing the chore when they're able, focusing on their own commitment, independent of the partner's potential reaction at that moment.
So the focus shifts entirely inward, doesn't it? From guessing and reacting to others' minds to knowing and acting from your own mind, your own values.
That's the core shift.
And this connects back beautifully to that your Tango source's idea about mindfulness, right? That it's like a helpful kind of mind reading.
Yes, this is such a powerful reframing. Your tango suggests that mindfulness is, in a way, a very helpful kind of mind reading. But the mind you are reading is your own.
Ah, okay. Reading your own mind.
Exactly. By intentionally pausing, paying attention, noticing your own feelings, your thoughts, your body sensations, maybe your underlying expectations, and doing it without judgment, you dramatically increase your self-awareness.
You're basically becoming intimately familiar with your own internal landscape, like mapping it out.
Perfectly said.
Hmm.
And the self-awareness. That's the engine that powers the shift to becoming a mind knower. When you understand your own patterns, your own typical fears of judgment, your own uncommunicated expectations, and typical reactive thoughts, you are so much better equipped to catch the mind-reading habit in action.
You see it happening.
You see it happening. And instead of just automatically reacting to the assumption, you can notice the assumption as an assumption, as just a thought passing through. And this allows for much clearer communication. You might even be able to say something like, oh, hang on, I just realized I was totally expecting you to magically know I needed help with that just then.
Huh. Yeah, that moment of recognizing, oops, I was trying to make you read my mind.
Yeah.
It probably diffuses so much potential conflict right there. Opens the door for real communication instead. Okay, this concept shifting from mind reader to mind knower, powered by self-awareness, it makes so much sense. But the big question is how? How do we actually do this? What are the practical tools, the strategies to really challenge and change this ingrained mind reading habit?
Right. This is where the practical stuff comes in. And the techniques drawn from cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, are just invaluable here. The main goal, as described by Therapist Aid and the Bay Area CBT Center, is something called cognitive restructuring.
Cognitive restructuring, okay.
It basically means actively identifying those automatic, often irrational, negative thoughts, mind reading being a prime example, and then systematically working to replace them with more balanced, more realistic, and frankly, more helpful alternatives.
So it's not just about noticing the thought, like in mindfulness, but actively intervening and changing it, modifying it.
Precisely. It's like being a scientist, but the experiment is on your own thoughts. And one really structured way to do this is using the ABCD model. VA.gov outlines this, and it gives you a clear step-by-step process for analyzing a specific time you caught yourself mind reading.
Okay, walk us through ABCD. Let's use an example.
Sure, let's take that common one. Your friend didn't text you back for a few hours.
Okay, happens all the time.
Right. So A is the activating event. Friend hasn't replied to your text for several hours. Simple fact.
Got it. A.
B is your belief system or thoughts. This is where the mind reading comes in. The thought is, they're ignoring me on purpose, they must be mad at me, or maybe they think I'm annoying.
Okay, the negative assumption. B.
C is the consequences. How did that belief, B, make you feel? Probably anxious, right? Maybe a bit hurt or rejected. Those are the emotional consequences. What did you do? Maybe you avoided texting them again. Or maybe you felt withdrawn or snappy when you eventually saw them. Those are behavioral consequences. You might have felt tension in your shoulders, a knot in your stomach, physical consequences.
Okay, so A, B, C, the event, the thought, the fallout. Now for the crucial step.
Exactly. D is disputing. This is where you actively challenge the belief. B. You interrogate it, like a friendly detective examining the evidence for that thought.
How do you do that?
You ask questions. Questions like, is this thought really helpful right now?
Mm.
Does believing this promote my peace of mind? Critically, is this thought based on actual facts? Or is it just based on my feeling, my anxiety? What is the hard evidence for this thought? And just as importantly, what's the evidence against it? Could there be any other explanation for them not texting back?
Brainstorming alternatives.
Yes. Then, based on that challenge, that disputing, You identify a more realistic, more balanced alternative thought to replace the old, unhelpful mind-reading one.
So for the texting example.
Well, the evidence against "they're mad at me" might be, actually, they're usually pretty good about texting back eventually. They've never explicitly told me I'm annoying. They have a really busy job.
Right.
And alternative explanations. Maybe they're in a long meeting. Maybe their phone battery died. Maybe they're driving. Maybe they just haven't even seen the text yet.
So many other possibilities.
Exactly. So the more balanced alternative thought, the result of D, could be something like, okay, my friend hasn't texted back yet. They're probably just busy with work or something else. I don't actually have any evidence that they're mad at me or ignoring me on purpose. I'll likely hear from them later.
That feels so much calmer. That process forces you to look beyond your initial, often fearful interpretation and actually consider the facts.
It really does.
What other questioning techniques can help with this D phase, the disputing part?
Well, Socratic questioning is a big one, mentioned by therapist aid and psychotherapy resources. It's like having a gentle, curious conversation with yourself about the thought.
A friendly inquiry.
Yeah. You ask yourself questions designed to kind of poke holes in that automatic assumption, like, is this thought really realistic? Where's the actual concrete evidence for this belief that they're mad at me? What evidence contradicts it? Is it possible I'm misinterpreting their behavior? Is this just my anxiety talking, or do I have solid facts? Am I seeing this in black and white when maybe there are shades of gray?
Getting specific.
Very specific. And therapist aid emphasizes the importance of actually spending time with each question. Don't just rush through them. Genuinely consider the answers.
It's about deliberately slowing down that lightning-fast automatic process and applying some logic, some reason.
Exactly. And a core part of that Socratic questioning is actively seeking evidence. This comes up in psychotherapy resources, groundwork counseling, Bay Area CBT Center. It's the active step of looking for proof.
Like a detective gathering clues.
Pretty much. If you think someone is judging you negatively, what concrete things have they actually said or done that prove that? Be specific. Then what have they said or done that doesn't support that conclusion? What contradicts it? And crucially, especially for challenging mind reading, what are other possible, plausible explanations for their behavior besides your initial negative guess?
Generating those alternatives again.
Yes. Maybe the quiet partner isn't mad. Maybe they're just tired from a long week. Maybe the neighbor who didn't wave didn't actually see you. Maybe they were thinking about their grocery list. Actively generating these alternative explanations really weakens the certainty of your initial mind-reading thought.
So you're intentionally broadening your perspective, moving beyond that first, often fearful assumption. But sometimes, maybe the simplest approach is best.
It often can be. If you feel brave enough in the moment, asking direct questions suggested by the Bay Area CBT Center is probably the fastest way to get clarity.
Just ask them.
Just ask them. Instead of stewing and assuming your quiet colleague is mad at you, you could gently ask, "Hey, is everything okay? You seem a bit quiet today." Or with your partner, instead of assuming annoyance, "You seem lost in thought tonight. Is something on your mind?"
It bypasses all the guesswork.
Completely. Cuts right through it.
Now, it definitely takes courage to ask, doesn't it? Especially if you're secretly worried you might confirm your negative assumption.
It absolutely does.
Right.
It requires vulnerability, but it prevents that whole mind-reading cycle from even starting, or it nips it in the bud.
Okay. But if asking feels too hard or maybe inappropriate in the situation, or you want a way to challenge the thought internally first.
Right. Then therapist aid offers another great technique called putting thoughts on trial.
Huh. The courtroom for your brain. I like it.
Exactly. It's a fantastic mental exercise to help separate facts from feelings and assumptions. You basically set up a mini trial in your head. You are the judge.
Okay, judge me.
And you appoint 2 attorneys for your mind-reading thought. First, you act as the defense attorney. Your job is to argue for why your mind-reading thought is true. But here's the rule. You can only use verifiable facts as evidence. No feelings allowed, no assumptions, just cold, hard facts.
Facts only for the defense. Got it.
Then, you switch hats. Now you're the prosecutor. Your job is to present the evidence against the mind-reading thought. And again, the same rule applies. Only verifiable facts.
Facts only for the prosecution, too.
Right. Therapist aid uses an example. Say you had an argument with your partner last night and now you're mind-reading. They're definitely going to leave me.
Okay, a high-stakes thought.
Yeah, so the defense attorney might present facts like, fact, we argued last night. Fact, they seem distant this morning. That might be all the factual evidence they have.
Okay. Limited facts.
Then the prosecutor steps up. Their factual evidence might be, fact, we've been together for 5 years. Fact, they said I love you yesterday morning. Fact, we made plans together for next weekend. Fact, they sometimes get quiet after arguments, but we always work through it.
So the prosecutor brings in all the other relevant facts, especially the positive or neutral ones that the mind reading totally ignored.
Precisely. You stack up all the factual evidence that doesn't fit the negative story. And finally, you put your judge hat back on.
Order in the court.
Exactly. You review only the factual evidence presented by both sides, not the emotional arguments, just the facts. And then you deliver a verdict. The verdict isn't an emotional conclusion like, I feel scared. It's a rational, balanced statement based purely on the presented facts.
So for the partner example,
The judge's verdict might sound something like, based on the evidence presented, while the argument last night was clearly upsetting and their quietness this morning is noticeable, the factual evidence overwhelmingly supports that this is generally a loving and committed relationship. There is no factual evidence presented to support the conclusion that my partner is about to leave me.
wow, that structured review of just the facts must be incredibly effective at cutting through the fear and the assumption.
It really helps create distance and perspective.
What about those catastrophic what-if scenarios that often seem to tag along with mind reading? Like, if they think I'm incompetent, I'll get fired.
Ah, yes, the catastrophizing.
Yeah.
That's where another technique from therapist aid comes in handy. Decatastrophizing, sometimes called the what-if technique.
Okay, how does that work?
When you're caught in a mind-reading thought and you're feeling really anxious about the supposed terrible consequences, you deliberately ask yourself, okay, let's play this out. What is the absolute worst thing that could realistically happen if this mind-reading thought were actually true?
Face the fear.
Kind of. So if you assume your colleague thinks your idea is stupid, worst realistic outcome. Maybe they politely disagree in the meeting. Maybe they offer some critical feedback.
Okay, not ideal, but not the end of the world.
Right. Then you follow that feared scenario through to its conclusion. Okay, so they disagree. What happens then? Well, you discuss it. Maybe you revise the idea based on their feedback. Maybe you agree to disagree. Maybe the team goes with a different approach. You keep asking, and then what? Often when you trace the actual realistic worst-case scenario all the way through.
You realize it's not actually a catastrophe.
Exactly. You realize it might be uncomfortable or disappointing, but it's probably manageable. You could cope with it. And seeing that clearly really helps reduce the anxiety attached to the initial mind-reading thought.
You're training your brain to see that even the feared outcome isn't likely to be the absolute disaster you imagined. Now, the sources also mention how other distortions can kind of link up with mind reading, right? Like they support each other.
Yes, that's a really important point from psychotherapy resources. Mind reading rarely acts completely alone. It's often propped up by, or works in tandem with, other unhelpful thinking styles.
Like accomplices.
Yeah, like cognitive distortion accomplices. For example, if you're mind reading that someone is judging you, you might also be personalizing taking something general, like them looking tired, and making it about you personally. They look tired of me.
Okay.
Or you might be fortune-telling, predicting a negative future outcome based on your mind reading. They think I'm incompetent, so I'm definitely going to get fired. Or maybe you're using a negative filter, only noticing the tiny bits of evidence that seem to support your negative mind reading, while ignoring all the evidence that contradicts it.
Right. Only seeing the proof you're looking for.
Exactly. So becoming aware of these other supporting distortions can help you dismantle the whole thought structure that's keeping the mind-reading belief alive. It's like seeing the whole tangled web of negative thinking, not just one thread.
Okay, that makes sense. There was also a technique mentioned about asking, so what? Can you explain that one?
Ah, yes. This is a really powerful kind of values-based technique from psychotherapy resources. It comes into play when maybe after trying to challenge the thought, you still have a nagging feeling that your mind reading might actually be true. Or maybe you even get confirmation that, yes, that colleague genuinely didn't seem to like your idea, or yes, that acquaintance really did seem a bit judgmental.
Okay, so maybe the thought has some truth to it. Then what?
Then you shift focus. You ask yourself, firmly but kindly, so what? If this is true, why does it bother me so much? Does their disapproval or disagreement say something fundamentally bad about me as a person? Or does it just say something about their perspective, their preferences, their mood that day?
Shifting the meaning.
Exactly. You ask, what specific, practical things will actually happen if they disapprove? Will the sun still rise tomorrow? Will my core values suddenly change? Will I still have my strengths and other positive qualities? You challenge the idea that you need universal approval. Why should that be the standard when absolutely no one is liked or approved of by everyone?
Right. Nobody gets 100% approval.
Nobody. So you weigh the actual costs versus the benefits of investing so much emotional energy in someone else's real or imagined opinion. Does it really warrant this much distress?
That really shifts the focus, doesn't it? From trying to control their mind or reaction to grounding yourself in your own values, your own resilience. It reclaims your power from their perceived opinion.
That's exactly the goal. Reclaiming your emotional energy. And sometimes taking action can help break the spell too, acting against your thought.
How does that work?
Psychotherapy resources and the Bay Area CBT Center suggest this. It involved deliberately behaving in a way that contradicts your mind-reading assumption.
Like a behavioral experiment.
Pretty much. So if you're convinced someone dislikes you or is judging you, instead of avoiding them like your mind-reading tells you to, you might make a point of being friendly or doing something small and kind for them.
Going against the grain of the fear.
Yes. This does two things. One, it provides you with new evidence. Maybe they respond positively, which directly contradicts your assumption. Two, even if they don't respond warmly, you learn that you can act based on your values, like being courteous or kind, even when you feel anxious or believe someone dislikes you. Your behavior isn't dictated by the mind reading.
You act independently of the thought.
Right. And some Reddit users sharing their experiences with social anxiety mentioned simpler actions too, like consciously holding eye contact a bit longer than feels comfortable, or deliberately improving their posture when they felt like shrinking away, acting as if they weren't being judged.
It's like doing the opposite of what the fear is screaming at you to do.
Okay.
And what about just improving communication directly? Seems obvious, but maybe overlooked.
Definitely not overlooked by the sources. The Bay Area CBT Center specifically notes that simply practicing self-disclosure, which means openly and clearly sharing your own thoughts, feelings, and needs, is a direct counterpoint to mind reading.
Instead of making them guess.
You tell them. Instead of waiting for someone to intuit what you need, you state it clearly and respectfully. Instead of assuming they don't understand your work project, you explain your process and maybe invite specific feedback. This reduces the ambiguity, the empty space, that often triggers mind reading to fill in the blanks negatively.
Which loops us back really nicely to the more detailed mindfulness practices we touched on earlier. How exactly does mindfulness help with the specific distortion mind reading?
Okay, so as your Tango, Therapist Aid, and the Bay Area CBT Center explain, the primary way mindfulness helps is by dramatically increasing your self-awareness. Remember how mind reading happens super fast because it's automatic?
Yeah, like a reflex.
Right. Mindfulness is the practice of intentionally slowing down and paying attention to your own internal experience, your thoughts, feelings, body sensations, and doing it with an attitude of curiosity and non-judgment.
Paying attention inwardly.
Exactly. By regularly practicing this, noticing your thoughts, there's that familiar thought, they think I'm stupid, noticing your feelings, okay, feeling some tension in my chest, a wave of anxiety, noticing your body sensations. My shoulders are really tight right now. You start to create a little bit of space between the automatic trigger, the mind-reading thought, and your immediate reaction to it.
You become more of an observer of the thought rather than being instantly swept away by it.
Precisely. You learn to see it clearly. Oh, that's a mind-reading thought.
Yeah.
You recognize it as a thought, not necessarily as a fact about reality. And that recognition gives you a choice point. Do I buy into this thought? Do I react? Or can I just let it pass?
How do people practice this?
Well, there are lots of ways. Formal meditation practices, like using guided meditation apps or joining a group, sitting quietly and focusing on your breath. But also informal mindfulness, just bringing awareness to everyday activities, paying attention while you're walking, washing dishes, eating a meal, noticing sights, sounds, sensations.
Bringing awareness to the present moment.
Yes, journaling is another great tool, and setting intentional check-ins throughout the day. Your Tango suggests maybe setting reminders on your phone, say 4 times a day, just to pause for 60 seconds and ask yourself, what am I thinking right now? What am I feeling? What sensations are in my body? What do I actually need in this moment?
Like taking a quick internal snapshot or scan.
Exactly. It builds that muscle of self-awareness.
Mm.
And you mentioned a personal example earlier related to this self-awareness and expectations.
Yes, the anecdote from the source material about visiting family and the whole dynamic around choosing a restaurant.
Tell us about that again. How did self-awareness help?
Well, I realized I had this, internal expectation, probably rooted in childhood patterns about where we should eat. It felt right to me. When that didn't happen, when my mother suggested somewhere else, there was this automatic flash of internal frustration, like a judgment, not really of her, but of the situation being wrong.
Okay.
The mind reading wasn't focused on guessing her thoughts. She's doing this to annoy me. It was more subtle. It was reacting to my own unmet, unspoken expectation. My internal script wasn't being followed.
Right. An internal blueprint wasn't matched.
Yeah. By using self-awareness, that mind reading of my own mind, I could catch it. I could notice the historical pattern. Ah, this feeling is familiar. I could recognize the feeling of disappointment as originating from my internal map, my expectation, not necessarily from her actions being deliberately frustrating or wrong.
You separated your internal reaction from the external event.
Exactly. And that awareness allowed me to accept the situation more easily, to communicate my preferences clearly, but without that underlying current of resentment that comes from an unexamined expectation. And ultimately, it helped me stay present and connected with my mother, which was actually more important to me than the specific restaurant choice.
That's a fantastic illustration.
It was a real example of how reading my own mind, understanding my own values, patterns, and expectations prevented a potentially negative interaction that could have been fueled by those unexamined, unspoken assumptions.
That really shows the power of turning that attention inward. Knowing your own mind truly helps you navigate the world and your relationships much more effectively than constantly trying to guess what others are thinking.
Definitely. And journaling, more specifically, you mentioned it briefly. How does that fit in as a tool?
Yes, the thought record, which Therapist Aid and the Bay Area CBT Center mention, is a core structured journaling tool directly from CBT. It's not just random scribbling.
How does it work?
You typically set it up in columns. You write down the activating event, the situation,
Okay.
then your specific thoughts, including the mind reading, then the consequences, your feelings, your behaviors. And then this is key. You actively dispute the thought in writing, using those Socratic questions we talked about. And finally, you write down a more balanced or alternative thought.
ATCDB.
Okay. Putting it down on paper like that is incredibly powerful. It makes those fleeting automatic thoughts visible and concrete. It forces you to slow down and challenge them systematically. And over time, it helps you identify recurring mind-reading patterns or themes that you might not otherwise notice just thinking about them.
So it's not just venting feelings onto the page. It's a structured process of observation, challenge, and reevaluation, all written down.
Exactly. It's actively training your brain,
Right.
creating new neural pathways.
Okay. Are there any other, maybe smaller tips or strategies from the sources?
Yeah, a few helpful ones. Psychotherapy Resources mentions practicing acceptance statements. For example, repeating a statement like, no matter what I do, some people won't like me, maybe for 20 minutes daily.
That sounds a bit bleak.
It can sound that way initially, but the goal isn't to become unlikable. It's about reducing the emotional reactivity to the fear of not being liked. By intentionally confronting and internalizing the reality that universal approval is impossible and, frankly, unnecessary for a fulfilling life, you lessen the sting when you suspect someone doesn't approve.
Ah, okay. Reducing the power of potential disapproval. Makes sense.
Right. And Reddit users also suggest injecting humor sometimes, like using that phrase, okay, wait, am I being slightly paranoid right now, or have I actually mastered the mystic art of telepathy?
Huh. I love that. It breaks the tension.
It does. It introduces a little self-awareness and highlights the potential irrationality of the thought in a lighthearted way.
They don't.
Also, allowing room for error, both for yourself and for other people. This came up in Reddit discussions too. Just accepting that people have bad days. They get distracted. They make mistakes. They're not perfect. Assuming these off moments aren't personal attacks or definitive negative judgments about you just allows for more grace and less friction in interactions.
Giving people the benefit of the doubt more often.
Basically, yes.
Okay.
And finally, managing your overall stress and anxiety levels is crucial. General relaxation techniques, deep breathing, meditation, progressive muscle relaxation. The Bay Area CBT Center notes these help with emotional regulation. When you're calmer overall, it's easier to engage your rational brain and challenge those mind-reading thoughts before they spiral out of control.
A calmer baseline makes you less reactive.
Exactly. And positive affirmations, used thoughtfully, can also help counteract the negative self-talk that often fuels those mind-reading projections in the first place.
So it really is a comprehensive approach, isn't it? Direct thought challenging, mindful self-awareness, behavioral experiments, improving communication, and just general emotional well-being practices all working together.
It really is. And it's worth just reiterating that pretty much all these practical techniques we've discussed, they're grounded in cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT.
Right. Can you just quickly remind us why CBT is sort of the bedrock for tackling this stuff?
Certainly, CBT is what we call an evidence-based psychotherapy approach. That means there are decades of scientific research demonstrating its effectiveness for addressing issues like anxiety, depression, and crucially for our topic, problematic thinking patterns like cognitive distortions, including mind reading.
Okay. And how does it work, fundamentally?
Fundamentally, it's based on that core principle we discussed. Our thoughts, feelings, and behaviors are all interconnected and influence each other. A CBT therapist helps you identify those specific links in your life. They teach you practical skills to challenge the accuracy and the helpfulness of your automatic thoughts, like mind reading. They guide you in developing more balanced perspectives and more adaptive behaviors.
So it helps you understand the connection and gives you tools to change it.
Exactly. It helps you understand that while your feelings are always real and valid, they aren't always accurate reflections of external reality, especially when they're based on assumptions about what's going on in someone else's mind.
It essentially gives you the practical skills to become your own thought detective, your own mental architect, to restructure that internal landscape.
That's a great way to put it. And of course, the Bay Area CBT Center appropriately notes if mind reading is a really deeply ingrained pattern for you, if it's causing significant distress, serious anxiety, depression, or major problems in your relationships or work life, then seeking help from a qualified mental health professional who specializes in CBT. That can provide invaluable support and expert guidance in implementing these strategies effectively.
That makes perfect sense. Well, we can definitely use these tools ourselves. Professional help is there for when the patterns are really complex or severely impacting quality of life.
Absolutely. Don't hesitate to reach out for that support if you need it.
Well, this has been a truly deep dive, hasn't it? We've covered so much ground.
We really have.
We've journeyed from really understanding the core definition of mind reading, that automatic, usually negative guesswork about others' thoughts.
Right, the assumption treated as fact.
Yeah. We explored how common it is through all those vivid, everyday examples. And we've really grasped its profound impact on our emotional well-being, our behavior, the health of our relationships, even recognizing how it can tragically create the very problems we were afraid of.
And we explored the roots, didn't we?
Yeah.
Why we do it, that automatic nature, the connection to our own insecurities and social anxiety, even that paradox of trying to read others' minds, because maybe we aren't aware enough of our own.
Right, but most hopefully, I think, we've armed ourselves, and hopefully you listening, with just a wealth of practical, evidence-based strategies drawn from all these sources.
Definitely. Tools from CBT like the ABCD model, Socratic questioning, seeking evidence, putting thoughts on trial, decatastrophizing, exploring the so what question.
Alongside those powerful practices like mindfulness and structured journaling, and even simpler actions like asking direct questions or acting against the fearful thought.
It's a whole toolkit.
It really is.
Yeah.
And it's clear, listening to all this isn't like flipping a switch, is it? It's a skill you build over time.
Absolutely. Recognizing and challenging mind reading takes consistent practice. It takes patience with yourself.
Yeah.
But the potential payoff, genuinely reduced anxiety, fewer misunderstandings, stronger relationships built on real communication instead of assumption, and a greater sense of self-worth grounded in fact in your own values rather than imagined external judgment. That payoff is immense.
It really feels like it's about making that fundamental shift we talked about, from being sort of externally driven, constantly reacting to guessed thoughts, to being more internally grounded.
Moving from being a mind reader, always guessing and reacting to the world outside, to becoming more of a mind knower, understanding and acting from the truth and the values within yourself.
So let's leave you, our listener, with this final thought to consider, building on everything we've explored today. What if? What if the vast amount of mental and emotional energy you might currently spend speculating, worrying, guessing about what others think about you, energy that so often leads to stress and self-doubt, what if that energy were instead intentionally redirected entirely towards the fascinating, empowering process of discovering and living in alignment with what you truly think, what you deeply value, and who you genuinely want to be in the world? What incredible clarity, what freedom, what authentic connection might you find waiting there for you?
That redirecting of energy, that's really where the transformation happens, isn't it? Thanks so much for joining us for this deep dive today.